The last 2 years, it's been great because the Monday after the Army-Navy game, I wear my tar bucket to the staff meeting, and everyone hates me for a couple weeks because I wear it for the entire day. I don't know if you remember how heavy those things are. I have a headache by the end of the day because
Right.
I've forgotten how to wear a
It's
helmet
like
all
we
day
would have
long.
had headaches if we would have worn it all day back then.
Yeah, it's horrible, but it's actually fun because it pisses all the Navy guys off, and that's just
That's
a joyous thing to do.
fantastic. Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. My guest today is Dr. Charles Cushman, Cullum number 43079. We'll hear about Chuck's approach to high school cross-country anger management and his rise through academia due to the ability to fill out paperwork well. As always, the views expressed on this podcast are those of the participants and not of West Point, the Army, or any organization, most particularly the U.S. Naval Community College. Dr. Charles Bancroft Cushman Jr., welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Paul. It's great to be here.
If it's okay, if we could just call you Chuck.
Let's do that. I like that a lot more.
We were talking before we started about what an amazing name that is. And
it's a family name. I'm named, I'm a junior. I'm named for my father.
Right.
And growing up, everyone called me Charles at school, and I was that's a little formal. And my dad went by Charlie, so I couldn't be Charlie because when you hear Charlie Cushman, everyone who knew my dad would like, that's him. And so I actually started going by Chuck on our day.
Really?
I had been thinking for a long time, like, who am I going to be when I leave South Carolina and I go off to have my life?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be Charles and I really don't want to be Charlie. So what the hell else do you do, right? And walk into my little room after I've been received by West Point, and there's my roommate who quit at the end of Beast Barracks. But he looked at me and said, "What's your name?" And I was like, "That's supposed to be an easy question, but I'm not sure." So I said, "What the hell? I'm Chuck," and I've been Chuck since July the 1st, 1982.
That was you consciously went with that. That's just to differentiate yourself from your dad and your past.
Yeah, and it's like, hey, you've left home, your life as whoever you are is starting. Let's put a label on it and make it our own, and let's get going.
Very wise, very smart, very smart. Now you've grown into your name now because you're the dean at your school. So
yes, I am. For the last almost 25 years, I've been in higher education, and for most of that, I've been running programs. And I run programs. I started running programs because no one else at GW, where I was working, wanted to do the paperwork. And so nothing was getting done in a timely basis. And the students were starting to yell. It's like, I need this form filled out. I need a signature on this. And I was looking around, it's like, who's in charge of this? And everyone was like, And I was like, okay. The Army taught me how to move paperwork. That's one skill you get that's transferable, is how to manage bureaucracy. So I started yelling at people to bring me the forms. I'll move them for you. And after a while, I realized, no one in the academic world has any background or training in management or leadership. And so stuff just kind of happens, or it just kind of doesn't. And so I was like, okay, fine. This is not something I really want to do. But at the same time, all you knuckleheads aren't going to do it. So
you were the one making things happen for people, right?
Yeah. When someone wanted something done, they're like, go see Professor Cushman. He'll figure it out with you. Because half the time it's like, okay, what office do we have to go yell at to get this done for you?
Yeah.
And no one knew because no one was doing it. So it's like, well, I've figured out how to get brigade to say yes to things. So we'll just apply that skill to this university campus until we figure it all out.
People often think our superpower as West Point grads is, charging hills and follow me, but really it's getting the paperwork done is really the skill we got.
Right? Yeah, you got to make sure that it's really the logistics side of things, right? You got to make sure that the supplies show up.
Well, let's go ahead and travel all the way back to Seneca, South Carolina.
Oh my God.
Young at the time, Charles Cushman. What was it about West Point that was attractive to you?
Well, a theme develops. The tuition was exactly what I was able to pay. That was a big deal. There were three things I think that were pushing. My dad had lost his job in that big 80, 81 recession. Mm-hmm. And so he's finding things to do, but my parents made it really clear, we're not sure we're going to be able to help you with college. I said, okay. And right about the same time that happened, I was in junior ROTC in high school because if you took junior ROTC, you didn't have to take PE. And I didn't want to take PE because I thought it was stupid. So of course, I joined the Army where I did PE professionally. Sometimes I make quixotic decisions. But the junior ROTC instructor is a retired infantry lieutenant colonel. And he comes into class one day and throws a catalog on the desk in front of me and says, you need to read this and go there. I'm like, yeah, okay. So I took it home and I read it. It was like, well, this is interesting. It looks like a good program. There's good education. And then I got to that page where it said, there are no tuition and fees charged at West Point. I was like, let me get this card out and send it in and have them start sending me the paperwork, because that was a big one. And then the third thing that was really important to me is that West Point is 775 miles from Seneca, South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And that was just about far enough.
Just about.
Yeah.
774 was too close.
Yeah. There's like, nope. Annapolis is only like 400 miles away. That's not going to do it. And their uniforms weren't as cool, so I was not into it. But, my dad designed golf clubs for a living, which is a very strange thing to do for a living. And so what that meant in the 70s, 60s and 70s into the early 80s was every couple of years, all the big sporting goods companies would say, oh, it's time to redo our golf clubs. And so they would hire a room full of mechanical engineers who would show up with their slide rules, and they'd calculate all the little pieces and bits of the golf clubs. Really? And then they'd build them and they'd test them and then they'd refigure them, and they'd do that until they got the clubs to work the right way. And then the company would make the clubs off of that design and fire everyone because they don't need them anymore. My father loved to golf, so he wanted to do golf for a living. And so he turned his Coast Guard mechanical engineering degree into designing golf clubs. And what that meant is every couple of years we moved because we'd be done here, got to move. So I was born in Massachusetts, moved to Illinois, moved to Florida, moved to Connecticut. 1976, we moved to South Carolina. My mother basically burned the moving boxes at that point and told my father, if you would like to pursue another job somewhere else, you may feel free to go alone because I ain't doing this anymore.
Right.
And so, okay. And he was smart enough to go, okay, I think we'll stay here.
You talked about a PE avoidance program, but what was it that you showcased for the academy? Were you good at academics? You had to do some sports or some activities.
I was very good at academics. I was the battalion commander of my junior ROTC unit, so I could show them the leadership thing. And, the great thing about the West Point catalog is they have that demographic page where they say, here's the class we just admitted. This is all the stuff. And I looked and said, okay, I got that one. They got to athletic thing, said, oh, crap, I don't have that one. Yeah, so I joined the cross-country team, because we had a couple guys on the team who were superstars. The captain of our team placed third in the state finals. So, we had our guys that were going to score all the points. Right. Then we had to have those other guys. You had to have enough guys run so you qualified in the meet. I was one of those guys. It's like, you just have to finish. It's like, okay, I can finish. You'll have to wait a while because I'll get there. But about halfway through the season, we're riding on a bus.
I'll get there.
Yeah, but halfway through the season, right? We're riding to some high school somewhere in the upstate for a tournament. And one of the younger guys on the team said something that just absolutely pissed me off. I don't even remember what it was about, but he said something I thought was stupid. And I've always had a problem with stupid. So I went off, and I was so full of adrenaline when we got there and they shot the gun and it was time to start running. I took off, and it was like, wait a minute. I started passing people that I was used to sort of running with. It's like, what's happening? And I got to the finish with a decent time. Still, the good guys they've been finished for 3 or 4 minutes already. So I'm not a star by any stretch, but I come running across the finish line and the coach is like, what are you doing here? Like, I don't know. And that was what all of a sudden was like, oh, maybe I can do this athletic thing. So then I could say, oh, look, I have a letter in cross country. So, okay, now I've got the demographics. You could pick me. And they did. So it worked. whenever I'm mentoring students or counseling younger people about, how do you get ahead? Part of it is like, well, figure out what the picture is of the people who are successful
Yeah.
and mirror what they're doing. Figure out what it is that they did that got them there and learn how to do that.
How did you find it after all that preparation and kind of aiming for it? What was your experience?
Completely unprepared. West Point is a very special, magical experience that you're not ready for,
Yeah.
and so it punched me right in the face. But I have a habit of sort of, I'm very competitive, as most West Point people are.
Yeah.
So when the system said we're going to grind you down, I said, no, you're not. I'm stubborn. No, you're not. I'm going to fight back, right? So I did. I fought back. I think that's what a lot of people who succeed do. It's like, this is a personal challenge. I'm going to best you, one way or the other, and that was the big thing. Is like academically, it was stressful because it was a lot more challenging than high school, but it was manageable, and the discipline was not a big problem. The junior OTC helped a lot because I already knew how to march. I'm weird. I think marching's fun, so that was no big deal. Playing dress up was fun, so putting all the uniform stuff on was great.
Yeah.
That didn't bother me at all. And you had to learn all the uniform stuff in junior ROTC because we had to wear uniforms. So, the concept of it has to, here's the barracks arrangement guide, make everything look like this. It's like, okay, I can do that. So that, that part, all of that it wasn't easy by any stretch of the imagination, but I knew what to do. I knew how to fight that fight, right?
Yeah.
So two things that were kind of fun about it for me. One part of it was actually easier. I got more sleep plebe year than I did in high school.
Really?
I worked full time at Wendy's and McDonald's my last 2 years in high school, and so I literally did. I didn't have to be spares because that just messes with you. But once we were into the academic year, I got an hour and a half a night more sleep than I ever got in high school, and so I was like, I actually feel great. I didn't say that out loud because I didn't want anyone's like, oh, he's enjoying this. Let's get sticks and beat him more because that's not going to work. So that I think that sleep is really important, right? So getting more sleep, I think I had more energy as a result than I had in high school because I wasn't just exhausted all the time because I was going to school full time and going to work full time. So for me, though, here's the big.
It's more, the whole system was running.
Yeah. So the system had kind of kicked into a better gear without me realizing it, right? So for me, though, the challenge of West Point was that I was fighting the whole time a two-front war. So you got your West Point war that everyone was fighting, and I had this other one over here that I had managed to actually avoid talking to myself about or engaging with in high school because it was the 80s and you had no models. But I'm gay, and I had not accepted that. I had not figured that out fully until like halfway through spring semester of our plebe year. I'm looking in the mirror one morning, shaving, getting ready to go to breakfast formation, and I had this sudden blast of inspiration. It's like, dude, your forces are split because you're fighting the West Point battle to stay here and be a good cadet, and you have studiously been fighting this guerrilla warfare against yourself. Yeah, and it's time. You got to pick one. Yeah. You can win one.
Energy a human has, right?
Right, and I somewhere in here I realized, hey, you're running down because you're overextended. Yeah. So, do you want to win the West Point War? You got to surrender and accept who you are on this other side. If that's the fight you want to have, this is not the place to do it. Get out of here and go find yourself. And I was like, you know what? I'm here. I'm looking at myself in the mirror. I found myself. All right. Well, okay. I surrender on that front. You're gay. Get over it. And hey, you got 2 minutes to get to breakfast formation. And
did you feel a release of energy, or did that work basically? Did it give you?
It did. It worked. It was like all of a sudden now, hey, all those troops that used to be over here, I can now redeploy
Right.
and focus on being a scary gray hug cadet,
Yeah.
which is what I did. Because, okay, so you may not recall this, but in 1982, 1983, it was not cool to be a gay cadet. So, of course, you're not going to go,
I do recall
not really going to tell anyone, hey, guess what? I just discovered this thing about myself and it's cool. No. So what those extra troops could do was go into defensive mode.
Yeah.
I call it hiding in plain sight, right?
Yeah.
So it was again just like reading the demographic thing. You look around and say, who's successful here? It's the guys who are very athletic. It's the guys who are very aggressive, and they embrace the West Pointness, right?
Right.
So I started going to the gym all the time, and so there was this. I was a little skinny guy in high school. I ran cross country. That's why I picked it.
Right.
It's like, oh, you don't need muscles for that. Let's go, because I didn't have any. And I realized, oh, you need these things in the Army. They think muscles are important, so I better go find some.
Sure.
So I don't know if you remember at the gym there was this machine you put your head in it, and it had all these little pads around it, and there were pistons.
Yeah, I do remember.
And you do this thing, and I did that, and I got these big muscles here, and I had a lot of rage because I was me at West Point, so so the big muscles and the rage, and then I started going to the to Big Ed at the barbershop.
Yeah.
To get the special. You remember the special, the little Ranger haircut?
Yeah.
I went to that. And I'm naturally introverted, but I realized that didn't work at West Point. If you want to be successful here, you have to be big, right?
Yeah.
Personality. So I was loud, and I was profane, and I had the big muscles, and I had the little haircut, and I was the first sergeant our first year. And I was like, and people, if you said to most people, a guy's gay, it's like, there's no way that is gay. Because none of that was the stereotype, right?
Right.
And so it was hiding in plain sight.
Well, I remember the haircut.
Yeah.
From that time, because you were in G3, I was in I3. So I
exactly, right down the street. And and Jeff Williams was one of my best friends as cadets.
Yeah. Jeff was in my company.
So, I mean, and it worked. It worked. Then during yearling year, I discovered the speech and debate team.
I saw that on your record, right?
Yeah. So that was the foundational experience for me at West Point.
Okay.
Great. Jack Midgley was a SOCP, armored cavalry officer, was the coach. The smartest person I have ever met in my entire life, and absolutely brilliant as a debate coach, teaching you how to think, teaching you how to work through problems, teaching you how to take arguments apart, put them back together, find the holes, make your attacks. He taught me not just how to do public speaking, but he taught me how to think on my feet. Yeah, and okay, guess what? That turns into how to train soldiers. It's about teaching, and I just embraced that and just loved it. And that also meant that most weekends I was not on base.
Right.
I was out at a tournament somewhere, which gets you away from the place. You can blow off steam. You can have fun, and you're talking, competing all weekend long. So you get really good at public speaking. So when when you're a brand new lieutenant, and the commander says you give the safety briefing, because he wants to see what you do, and you go out there and you blow it away. He's like, wait, how do you know how to do that? It's like, well, I gave like 500 speeches in college, so this is not that hard.
So a safety briefing is rather straightforward.
Pretty easy, pretty easy. And then, okay, do this training. You're going to conduct this training. Okay, I can do that, sir. Let's go. And he's like, yeah, you're really good at this, right? Yeah. So I was in my first assignment in Germany, 266 Armor, 2nd Armor Division Forward, HUA. I did a year as a platoon leader, year as an XO, year as a battalion staff officer. And when I was a battalion staff officer, I was the voice of the talk.
Huh.
Because each of the S3s I worked for, would hear me talking on the radio and say, yeah, give him the radio. He actually knows what he's doing. And it's like, I may or may not know what I'm doing, but I sound like I know what I'm doing. And sometimes that's good enough, right? Because we had we had a brigade commander who was ferocious,
Yeah.
and I remember one day on the brigade net during an exercise, one of the other battalions is trying to make their report, and whoever is doing it is not very good. And the colonel comes on and says to the talk over there, "Hey, you're coming in broken and stupid. Put someone else on the line, and we'll try this again." And everyone's like, "Oh my god!" So
they handed the mic to you.
yeah, the S3 just handed me the mic and said, "We're next." And it's like, "Oh, thanks, sir." So sounding confident made the colonel happy.
Yeah.
Like, okay, thank you. That was a good report. Who's
So you
next?
went. All right, so why armor? What was it about armor that turned your head?
There were two things. One of them was my dad, not an armor officer, he was a Coast Guard officer, but he had this book from like 1946 that was a Dodge Corporation long form advertisement,
Right.
and it was called the cover of it had the title "Tanks Are Mighty Fine Things." I was like, okay, so I've been reading this, and it's this like 40s advertising thing, and the line is from an infantry sergeant whose squad was pinned down on the breakout from Normandy,
Yeah.
and a platoon of Shermans came over the hill and chased the Germans away. So he wrote a letter back to the factory that built them, and it ended with that line: "Tanks are mighty fine things."
That is a brilliant line. Thanks.
Yeah, so that was always in the back of my mind that I mean, he's a sergeant, he must know stuff, right? So, so then we're during plebe year, and especially during Beast, we're off on all these ranges and all these training sites, and there's an OIC,
Right.
and I started to see this pattern. The ones that I liked the most, every single one of them was an armor officer. There was something about the way they carried themselves, and it was like, there's something interesting here. So I started thinking in those terms. And then for CTLT, I went to the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment at Fort Bliss, Texas, and spent 5 weeks with them and spent almost all of it out in the desert with them on a big training exercise. Okay. So I got to actually do what armor guys do, and I loved it. It was really cool. It was very challenging because there's no terrain features out there. There's no contour lines. There's nothing. It's all dead reckoning. And I had sergeants.
What did they do? Did they throw you in a loader's hatch, or what did they do with it?
No, they made me the freaking platoon leader.
Is that right?
Yeah, they had the company I was in. I was in Echo Troop 2nd Squadron, and they had 2 lieutenants.
That's great.
So they had a platoon leader and an XO, and the other 2 platoons were run by the platoon sergeants. So they handed me to one of the platoon sergeants and said, "He's your lieutenant for the next 5 weeks."
Great.
And yeah, it was awesome, right? And the platoon sergeant was awesome. So he basically said, "Just keep your mouth shut and do what I tell you." Right. And after a while, I started. He taught me the role. So I started.
You had that feel of commanding a platoon and just
exactly. And I, loved the soldiers. I loved being around all the big pig iron was great fun, and watching what those cats could do. So our troop commander. At the end, they did a gunnery exercise. So it was a cavalry troop. So we had half 113s and half M60A1s, just old hulking brutes of machines. And so we go and do the gunnery exercise so the tank crews can do some practice before their record fire. And the troop commander put a case of beer as a bet. There was this old hulk of a tank. They measured it after this. It was 4,061 meters downrange.
Right.
Case of beer if anyone can hit it. And one of the sergeants drilled it.
Okay.
And this thing had a coincidence rangefinder, right? Not a laser rangefinder. It has the two little mirrors on the side of the tank in the little bubbles. And you spin the little thing until the picture, and that far out, you're spinning for a while to get the pictures to coincide. And this guy, he was a Vietnam vet.
Yeah.
He'd been in tanks for 300 years at that point. He knew what he was doing, and he drilled it. And you could tell because we couldn't see it. It was so far away. Yeah. But when the round hit the tank, if it hit the hulk, there was this really bizarre green shaded spark that would pop. And there it was. And the next morning, the captain came by the tank and put a case of beer on the front of it, shook everyone's hands. He's like, and at that point, that was right when he hit that target. It was like, I want to work with these guys.
You're 20 years old, 20-year-old cadet.
Yeah.
there. I mean, that had to be like, oh my God, I want to do this forever.
Oh yeah. And how amazing the experience was, because I got to spend most of CTLT. I was out in the field, so I was actually doing lieutenant stuff. I wasn't just going to formation or whatever.
Well, that's how that program's supposed to work. You go out and it enthuses you about what's out there, right?
Yeah, it worked. I mean,
Yeah.
I drank the Kool-Aid hard.
Good for you. Because you went to Germany for your first assignment.
I did. So I was a Soc major, IR.
You were a Soc major. Okay.
I was, and I was a major. I elected to do I wanted the degree, and I was really good at foreign languages. So I took all the Russian language classes I could take because I got really good grades in them.
Okay.
But that counterbalanced my less than stellar performance in the engineering classes. So that kept me high enough up in the class that I got what I wanted. And then it was time, when it was time to pick posts, I did the research. Everyone who knew me knew I was going to pick the 11th Cavalry because that's where you went.
Yeah.
And I was all ready to do it. I don't know if you remember Major Young, the G3 TAC.
I do actually. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah,
that.
Major Young was awesome. As long as if you met the standard, he was great. If you didn't meet the standard, it was not a fun experience. And so Mark Iverson and I spent half of our first semester not meeting the standard. And then he tightened us up, and all of a sudden we figured out how to meet standard because that wasn't very much fun. So he was an 11th Cav guy. My sponsor was an 11th Cav guy. So I'm going to the 11th Cavalry because that's what you do. And here we are on branch or post night, right? We're sitting in order, and we're going through. There are 12 slots for 2nd ACR and 11th ACR, and 11 are gone when they called my number. And there's that one slot left. And I very slowly stood up, and everyone who knew me knew I was going to pick the last slot because this has been foreordained. And then I looked and I realized who, the kind of people who had picked were all the hard charging starmen. And I said to myself, I've been looking forward for about 4 years to getting out of here. And if I pick this assignment, I just signed up for 3 more years of this crap. And I really want to do that? And then I had done the research about all the other units, and 2nd Armored Division Forward was a really strange assignment. There were only 2 slots, and there was only 1 slot left. And it was up in the northern part of Germany. No one had a real clear explanation for what they did.
Huh.
And I said, well, that sounds kind of cool. Plus, I had a thing for the 2nd Armored Division because it was Patton's first flag command. And I'm a big Patton fan, obviously. And I loved their motto, Hell on Wheels.
Yeah.
I thought that was a pretty cool thing. It's like, maybe I want to be part of that. So I stood up and said 2AD forward and sat down, and Doug McDowell, our classmate who was in F Troop, was sitting right beside me, and his mouth was hanging open when I sat down. He's like, what did you just do? I was like, stand up and take the slot before I have second thoughts.
I changed my mind.
And he jumped up and said 11th ACR. And I was like, okay, it's done. And I'm so glad I did that because the 2AD unit was weird. It was we were in the middle of the British Army sector, and we did all of our exercises with allies. Huh. So I got to see how everyone else did things, and they got to see how we did things, and that was fascinating. And I think that was a lot more interesting than doing the standard, Southern Germany with all the other American units thing, because it was such a weird assignment. And we were a very high priority unit, so we had just absolute insane amounts of training money. My first tour, I want to deploy. I want to go out to go out to an overseas unit and see what that's all about. And so I did, and it was amazing. The experience was great. We had M1s, which was great. We transitioned to the M1A1 while I was there, which was a ton of fun to see the big monsters and what they could do.
Yeah.
And there's nothing cooler in the entire world than driving through downtown Hamelin, Germany, in an M1A1 tank. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty cool. I was like, this is a pretty cool job, and they're paying me cash money to drive tanks through this town. I mean, not very much cash money, but they did give me a tank. So
a lot of the Army was not cool, but there were times when you look around and say, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah, and like when I explained the things I did when I was young to my civilian friends, they're like, "What?" Yeah. Like, yeah, that was my job. I drove a tank around and shot things. They're like, that doesn't sound like a real job. It's like, it was. It really was, and it was a lot of
That's a
fun.
real job.
So yeah, but I started to suspect during that tour that I was not going to be long for the Army.
Yeah.
Well, the one night where it became obvious, it's like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. We're in northern Germany. We're out getting ready for a gunnery exercise. So we're at the NATO training site where we did our gunnery, and it's like 2 in the morning. It's northern Germany. It's November. It is cold. It's raining. So I'm standing behind my tank in the exhaust because that was the only way to stay warm. And Jeep pulls up. My battalion commander gets out. He's a great guy. He was promoted below the zone from major to lieutenant colonel to command the battalion, and he was an awesome leader. We loved him. So your boss is a guy that you like when you give him a good nickname, and his name was Mike Swazo. So all the lieutenants called him the Wizard of Swaz.
The Wizard of Swaz.
And yeah, we loved him. We loved him. He took great care of us. He trained us well.
Yeah.
And he was just a great guy. So he jumps out of the Jeep, and I salute him. He's, hey, Chuck, how you doing? And we have a long talk about what the platoon's been doing that day and blah, blah, blah. And he's telling me about what we're doing.
Yeah.
And it hits me while we're talking. It's like, if I do everything right in this career, in 15 years, I'm going to be standing in this exact same puddle, in the exact same rainstorm, freezing my ass off, but I'm going to be talking to the lieutenants. And I was like, I'm going to have to ponder this, because this is fun when you're 23. It's going to be fun when you're 37. Because I was already feeling it in the knees, jumping it off the tank, 16 times a day. It's like, this is going to hurt at some point. So then I go off, get back, go to the advanced course.
Now you were 2 years in Germany, and then you rotated back for the advanced course. That's
I was 3 years in Germany.
3 years, okay.
And came back for the advanced course. So January of '90, I was in the advanced course, and that was a good experience. A couple of international officers in the class. Doug McDowell was in my small group at the advanced course, so that was great. Doug was one of the guys that took the early out when they were.
That's interesting because he's the one who took that 11th ACR slot.
Yeah, so I think that just exhausted him. Yeah. So that was another reason I was like, thank God I went to 266 instead of the 11th Cav.
Yeah. Now you commanded a troop.
I commanded a training troop at Fort Knox. I was going to get out, and then look, it's 1991, and there's a recession. And I have an international relations degree. What am I going to do with myself, right? And then the social department called.
Yeah.
And they said, when you were a firstie, young captain, you announced in class a desire to come back to be a SOCP.
Really?
And I said, yeah, that's right, I did. And so, Colonel Kaufman, who had been the guy who was asking that question in all the social classes, was still in the department. He was the deputy head. So he actually every year he did that. He wrote the names down of everyone who volunteered.
Really?
And 5 years to the day after that, he took that card out of his Rolodex and handed it to the personnel officer of the department and said, find these men and get them.
That's a really wise policy.
The social department does an amazing job of recruiting and then retaining those folks to come back. The social department says we graduate 2 classes every year. The firsties and the captains or majors who are leaving us as instructors to go back to the Army. And they tell you when you leave, keep your eyes open. You see a hot shot that should be back here teaching, send that name to us so that we can recruit them. And they do a great job, right?
That's
really,
smart.
Really smart.
Yeah,
and they've been doing it for like 50 years. So they've been at this for a long, long time. So I filled out the paperwork, got accepted, did the whole conversation with them about what I had to do to be qualified for the job. Started working on that. Then had the conversation about where are you going to grad school, because we're going to send you to grad school because you need a master's degree to come back and teach for us.
Yep.
So I got at that point, I marched down to the personnel office and said, I'm a captain, and in order to be branch qualified, I need to command. So find me something to command. And they said, well, here at lovely Fort Knox, we have one maneuver brigade. It's about a 2-year waiting list for one of those commands. I said, okay, what else you got? Because the armor branch has made it clear I need to command something. They don't care what it is.
Right.
And I said, well, we've got some training troops. I said, give me the name of the squadron commander. I will go interview for one of those jobs. So I went and saw 612 Cavalry, one of the in-house training units, interviewed, got accepted. And like 3 weeks later, I was in command.
And how did the timing of that work relative to the amount of command time, then you went to grad school, then back to the social department? How'd that work?
Perfectly, yeah, absolutely perfectly. I finished command. I did 14 months in command. So the next year, which would have been the summer of '92, I gave up command right before Memorial Day.
Uh-huh.
And then over Memorial Day weekend, I drove to lovely Fortress Leavenworth for CAS Cubed. Spent the summer there, learning how to be a staff officer. This is like foreshadowing. Guess what? You're going to use this in about 15 years when you're a professor.
Right.
And then drove back across the country to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and started studying American politics at Carolina.
What was it like being a Soc P?
It was so much more fun to go to West Point the second time. It was so much more fun. The social department's a great place to work. You basically, the department head called all of us newbies in and said, we picked you because you're good. I expect you to continue to be good. Go to your classroom and win the fight. And I was like, really? No, you're not going to make, you don't have specific. I was like, no, you're a grown adult. You're a good officer. You know what to do. Make this happen. It's like,
that's great.
Okay. And they did a great job of the train up for, I taught SS 202, Introduction to American Government. They did a great job of training us up on here's what the class is about, here's what we want to cover. But in terms of individual lessons, it's up to you.
You would think that the academy would be, well, I guess the social department charted their own course, so they allowed you a little bit of flexibility.
Yeah, each department does it their own way, and I think the social department really models. I mean, that's how you do it. If you really want to be Colonel Kaufman's senior year roommate is a guy I know here in Washington, and he over dinner one night at some conference we were going together. He said, when we were firsties, we're doing that late night BS chatting, like, what are you going to do in the Army when you graduate in a few months? And Kaufman told him, I'm going to be the most important man in the Army. He's like, wow, you want to be the chief of staff? He's like, no, I'm coming back here to teach you. And I was like, what? So he reported to West Point as an instructor in 1974, and he retired in 2004.
Now, we're going to leap a little bit, but I think it's relevant. How do you apply that, what you learned from him and from the social department, to what you do now? Because you're in higher education.
Yeah. Two ways I think that are really important. One is in the classroom. Very aggressively teach the students and engage them and force them to think. It's like, you have to learn this stuff. I'm not going to feed it to you. I'm going to put it in front of you, and then I'm going to attack you until you get it. I'm going to be relentless and unpleasant if necessary. And I'm going to make you think through things. My favorite thing to do in a classroom when someone makes a pronouncement is like, that's really interesting. Why?
Right.
You got to explain it. I told them I was a captain of the debate team. You're going to have to convince me. And even if I actually 100% agree with you, I'm going to say why. And if you don't know the steps, I'm going to dog you. I'm a big believer in like with the associate deans that have worked with me, because I'm in year 9 as a dean at my second college. So I've had a bunch of associate deans work for me. And I tell them, I'm preparing you to be me, because I'm not doing this forever.
Yeah.
And I say, well, I have a plan. I'm going to buy a house in Rehoboth, and I'm going to hang out at the beach, and I'm going to spend the summers in the south of France drinking pastilles in some square in some really pretty little French town.
You have a plan.
I don't have time for this crap, staying at work till I'm 70.
By the way, your plan's a pretty good plan. Just I don't know. I know you don't need the validation, but
I kind of like it. It sounds pretty good to me. I'm kind of like, could we move on to that phase? I'm ready to go. Let's go.
If you want some feedback, that's a good plan.
Well, thank you. I do like to hear the validation, because I think it sounds pretty good, but it's always nice to have someone else say, yeah.
Even the captain of the debate team needs to have his facts checked. So you're
well. I think that's important, right? You don't want to misspeak. You want to be able to cite your sources. When I finished grad school, go off and teach at West Point. 2 weeks after I got there, our year group got offered the early out.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I get back to West Point, I discovered that the 33 tank battalions we had when I left for grad school are now 19 tank
Yeah,
battalions.
yeah, yeah,
Ooh, that doesn't sound good, armor officer. Um,
yeah.
I met a cute boy while I was in grad school, and I did kind of want to go back to Chapel Hill and hang out with him.
Yeah.
31 years later, he's still not tired of me, so that's pretty
Oh,
cool.
good for you.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, and the third thing, here's the thing, to cycle back to something you asked earlier.
Yeah.
The first day I reported back to West Point, when I put on my Class B uniform for the first time in 2 years and drove onto base and reported in to the department. As I walked in the building, so I was like, okay, it was shields up, Mr. Sulu, because you got to play the game again. And that was surprising to me because I had never realized how much energy went into keeping the shields up.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you just did it, right? Well, 2 years in grad school, I didn't have the shield. I turned the shields off.
Right.
The shield generator was down for 2 years because I didn't need it. So when I turned it on, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I'd never noticed that meter where I saw this sudden energy spike that went into playing the game again. And it's like,
Yeah, yeah. It was almost like
I
a
don't
replay of
like-
that mirror incident when you were a plebe, right?
Yeah.
You had the
Yeah.
allocation of energy issue, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden it was like, now you know what the price you've been paying all these years.
Yeah.
You didn't know it, so you just paid it. And now that you see what it's costing you, you're like, oh man, this is going to be harder than I thought. You know, the teaching part, being in the social department, the job part was great.
Right.
But I had to do that with the shields up, and I was like, this is exhausting. So when they threw, so me, Rob Healy, and Joe Gleason all reported to the social department the same day.
Uh-huh.
They were both econ Ps, and I was an American government P, and all three of us took the early out.
Okay.
And and I think we all did it for probably similar reasons, that we had learned things in grad school that we wanted to keep. Hey, I want to go back and do more of that. I wanted to go back and finish my doctorate because I wanted to teach. I mean, I had definitely, it's like, this is cool. This is what I want to do.
So teaching was always part of the equation, because you just.
It was my favorite part of being an officer. Was standing in front of the troops, teaching them something, working, teaching another lieutenant how to do something, or when I was a staff officer, teaching the companies, hey, here's how we need you to do this thing. I loved that. So I went back to grad school, took the early out, went back to grad school, finished my doctorate. And one of the things I realized in grad school, I realized it early on, but it really, when I went back, because I was writing my dissertation, so I'm being very theoretical for that time. It hit me that, political science is really freaking theoretical.
Yeah.
And I realized that the vast majority of my faculty, politics was a subject to study. It was not a thing people did. None of them had practical experience of the business. And that troubled me. I was like, would I give company command to someone who had never been a platoon leader?
Right.
Would I give battalion command to someone who had never commanded a company? No, you got to know what this stuff is. If someone's going to teach small unit tactics, I expect them to have maneuvered a small unit at some point. They know this stuff because they did it. So I really felt after I finished grad school that I need a postdoctoral practical application experience. So I went to work on a congressional campaign and came to Washington.
I saw that in your
This was all about, okay, I read it in the books. I want to go do it. I want to see how it actually happens, to see what's the distance between the theoretical expectations and explanations and the real world.
Down in the trenches, actually doing politics. What did you take? What were your high level takeaways from that experience?
Number one, it takes a very special person to put their name on a ballot and ask their fellow citizens to say yes. And I'm not one of those people.
Right.
It was interesting to watch my boss interact with constituents and to see how visceral the connection between him and his constituents was, even with constituents that he disagreed with. The mutual respect he was able to foster because he was so conscientious and serious about the job. It's like, this is a great guy. I mean, and so I got a lot of respect for him because that was hard, and I watched him. It's like, wow, I don't have the patience when someone says something really stupid to me, I tend to go, wow, that was really stupid. You don't do that with constituents. And that was really important because, I think it did make me a better teacher, but it was also, I was able to help students see like, hey, what we're learning in the classroom is directly applicable to the profession you want to join. So you've got to master this stuff so you'll be better at it once you get out there and you're doing this stuff for a living. And I thought that was pretty good. But the biggest lesson actually came from another guy that I worked with. He said this in answer to something. I've done a lot of teaching, various kinds of teaching, but one of the things I did was spend 3 years working at Georgetown at the Government Affairs Institute, teaching executive branch officials how to talk to Congress, because you got to interact with the Congress all the time. No one knows how to do it. Everyone hates Congress because it's Congress and they're easy to hate. But this guy, one day, someone said something basically like, why do we need to waste our time with these guys? He said, well, here's the very interesting thing. All of you are public servants. None of you have ever asked the citizens for permission to do your job. You just do your job, and you do what you think's right because you care about this and you're trained in whatever it is you do. But those members of Congress, every 2 years, they have to go back to the people and ask for their job back. They are the people that legitimize the rule of the people because they're the ones who get permission from the people to do this job. And you may not think that's a big deal, but their political work legitimizes the whole system because it's how we connect to the citizens we serve. And I was like, amen, brother. That is exactly right. And so one thing that, West Point beat two really big things into my head. One is I still march everywhere. I don't know how to walk.
You said that
I get yelled at by my friends all the time. It's like, there he goes. He's marching again. It's like, I'm sorry. This is what I do. And the second thing was service, right?
Yeah.
Even the civilian jobs in the private sector that I've had, to me, have all been about service because they're about making politics better. They're about training people to do this stuff in a more conscientious, more responsible way, more effective, so that we're doing a better job running the parts of the political system that we work in. And 13 years, 11 years, I guess it's about 11 or 12 years that I've been a civilian employee in various modes in the federal government. Have all been about service. The Army gave me an amazing education. They gave me a great job for 9 years on active duty. That was the basis of everything I've been able to do since. And I was inculcated by my parents and by West Point that you got those great opportunities and you owe something back. You got to pay it forward, and so you got to serve. And I'm a big fan of big government because big government's taken awesome care of me for my entire life, giving me opportunities that a little boy from South Carolina never imagined.
Yeah.
That were out there. I've gotten to do just really, really cool things, but it's all been about what can I give back to make us a better people. They start beating that into your heads on our day, right? And it took. Because that's what I'm always. That's the angle I'm always looking at.
I ordinarily ask everyone what advice they would give the 20-year-old self, but you just laid it out. I can't beat that.
To me, it's like hey, this is important.
No,
you've been given great opportunities. Right. It's like yes, you're taking great advantages of the opportunities. You have run with them. You've done really well with the chances you've had, but those chances didn't just happen.
Yeah.
And you owe it to the future generations to make sure the system still works when you shuffle off the stage, and so you got to serve.
Good for you.
And my spouse is he understands this, that this is what motivates me, and so when I go after all these jobs, like do you really want to be a dean again? Yeah, it's a pain in the ass, but guess what? It's a job that needs to be done, and I'm very good at this, and this is a cool thing. Like what I'm doing now. Providing educational opportunities to Navy enlisted people.
Yeah.
To me, that's like, hey, the Army, all the services do a great job of preparing officers with educational opportunities, but universally thinking about educating enlisted people who are 85, 90% of the force. That's an afterthought. So when I read about this Naval Community College is going to actually build programs to help Navy and Marine Corps enlisted people be better at their jobs and line them up for lifelong learning success, it was like, oh, you need to sign me up for this. This is the stuff.
Chuck, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It was such a pleasure to reconnect and talk you through about all your great experiences.
Paul, it was delightful, and I'm so glad you're doing this. The class owes you big bites at our next dining in, because you're really doing something to capture who we are as a group.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and to stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe buttons. With 954 living graduates in the class, we have a lot of stories to collect, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.